An often quoted passage from the book of Ephesians says that for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms, which all too often takes on some esoteric meaning with an inanimate form. And in an age in which even the Catholic Church would rather not discuss the topic of exorcism, the spiritual warriors are pretty much left on their own. However, in conventional battle, as well as in the unconventional forms it may take, during an offensive, there are two ways to shape the assault to the advantage of the attacker. First, overwhelming force that places your adversary in a reasonable apprehension of grave bodily harm or death, and which gave rise to the shock troop value of charging cavalry against infantrymen in the field. And the other way is through surreptitious enterprise, exploiting the advantages afforded by stealth and surprise, giving rise in the history of battle to such bold and audacious forays by the Japanese during World War II, to launch 6 aircraft carriers, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 2 battleships, 9 destroyers, 8 tankers, 23 submarines, and 5 midget submarines against a neutral nation while negotiations were underway, which no doubt played a key role in enabling them to lose only about 100 men compared to the 3,500 casualties, to include 2,300 fatalities during the successful attack on Pearl Harbor. And since the 4th century BC, the Assyrians were well aware that biological warfare afforded the advantage of surprise, because their adversaries had no way to know from their experience that a campaign to attrit their forces and strength had been commenced. But perhaps there is always luck, like the strong rains that had saved the capital from burning when the British attacked the city of Washington in August 1814. According to the most recent random digit dialing, or RDD, polling conducted by the Pew Research Center and announced in January, 63% of U.S. adults identify as Christians, including 43% who are Protestant, 19% who are Catholic, the largest single faith denomination, and 2% who are Mormon. And 28%, larger than Catholics, are nuns, including 4% who describe themselves as atheists, 5% who are agnostics, and 18% who are nothing in particular. By way of comparison, roughly a decade ago, in 2009, as many as 77% of U.S. adults described themselves as Christians, 14 percentage points higher than today, and 17% describe themselves as religious nuns, 11 points lower than today. RDD polling has been replaced at Pew by and large because of factors like declining response rates and rapidly rising costs that have made it increasingly difficult to conduct telephone surveys with people more reluctant to answer telephone calls from unknown numbers. Introducing an opt-in methodology recruiting 13,500 volunteers with attendant methodological biases described as the American Trends Panel, ATP, who are polled once or twice per year, and which they now concede consistently produces estimates that suggest that the U.S. population is less religious in a variety of ways than RDD telephone surveys indicate, even overstating the size of the population that is unaffiliated with any faith, which was discovered during the current public health crisis when they introduced the National Public Opinion Reference Survey, NPORS surveys, that were conducted among a representative group of U.S. adults recruited by drawing a national random sample of home addresses, known as addressed sampling, or ABS, and offering the ability to respond either online or via paper and pencil, and which achieved as high as a 29% response rate, which is pretty good. According to Pew Research Center's report in January, the most recent RDD surveys, 55% of U.S. adults say that they attend religious services for a few times a year or less, up from 47% who said this a decade ago. 55% say they attend religious services, up from 47% a decade ago. But then comparing the RDD survey results with the NPORS results, they found the respondents in self-administered surveys report far lower levels of religious attendance, with only a third of NPORS respondents, 33%, report attending religious services at least once a month, compared with 43%. And the NPORS respondents are much more likely to report rarely or never attending. 66% of NPORS respondents report attending a few times a year or less, versus 55% in RDD surveys. This is what the empirical data indicates. During a time where most churches are capped at how many people are able to attend worship in person, and at a time when data also suggests that as many as 20% of those that actually attend church decided that they were not going to return until after the pandemic. And this may not necessarily align with your perception or your opinion, but scientists pride themselves upon looking at the facts. And to them, you don't appear to be very intelligent if you ignore or deny empirical facts. And this is important because of another study completed by the Pew Research Center in January, which found that nearly 3 in 10 Americans, 28%, report stronger personal faith because of the pandemic. And the same share think that the religious faith of Americans overall has strengthened. According to the survey of 14 economically developed countries, with Americans the most confident that faith has grown in pandemic, in stark contrast to what the empirical findings regarding those reporting a faith affiliation or attendance at a devotional worship service, and at a time when the American Bible Society has reported that regular Bible reading is at its lowest point in history, regardless of what you may feel. We possess eyes and ears as human beings that inform us a lot about our surroundings, but there is a limit to how many stimuli to which a person can respond at one time. And we are not always equipped with sufficient knowledge to be able to process that information that we do receive as stimuli before responding in kind. For example, in college, some professors may tell you that change is inevitable, but growth is optional. But some changes are very perceivable even in ourselves, while some are reinforced by comparison with similar instances connected to self in the world of experience. For instance, a child who attends the same school from K through 8 will recall vividly wanting to one day become one of the big kids, something that they can see. And as a big kid, certainly it is very easy to notice the contrast between oneself and the little ones in the schoolyard that they used to be able to think the thought that years ago that was them. But surprisingly, if one were to depart the kindergarten classroom in that school after graduating and never return until 8 years later, more likely than not, you will be astonished about how small objects appear in the room that you once believed to be normal size. It's an incredible experiment. Similarly, there is an old preacher illustration about a man whose faith was so strong that he knew that if he ever encountered trouble, that his Lord would surely save him. And one day, when a strong storm came into his town and caused the dam to burst, sending rising and rushing waters into the valley where he lived, he had the sense to get out of the rising water and take up camp on the roof of his shanty house, where he happened to see a piece of driftwood float by. But he let that old piece of wood go away, because he knew that, sure as the sun rose in the morning and would set in the evening, his Lord would not let him perish in the flood. A little while later, a helicopter flew overhead, and the pilot shouted down to the man to inquire if he was all right or needed assistance to evacuate his home. but he proudly shouted up to the pilot that everything was okay because he was engaged in fervent prayer and just waiting for his Lord to come and save him. A little while later, a man in a boat came by, and the same conversation was repeated again because the old man knew that his fervent and incessant prayers would be answered if he was just patient and waited on the Lord. And so after he died and got to heaven, the man had a fierce attitude that he decided to unfurl on St. Peter at the pearly gate, who tried his hardest to be empathetic, as he explained how the Lord had heard his prayers and sent a piece of driftwood, had sent a helicopter, and had even sent a boat, and turned the question about upon him to inquire what exactly in hell it was that he had expected. My name is Major Mike Webb, retired Army Ranger and former operations officer for all Army strategic counterintelligence in the continental United States. And by God, I am running for governor of Virginia. For 2 decades, I served my nation in uniformed service under a solemn oath, so help me God, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic, an oath to which I remain obligated until such time that I may choose to resign that commission. So I ask every Virginian and every American true to, like the motto of the infantry, follow me, and we shall overcome. Honest. And y'all come back now. Here. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. And y'all come back now. Here.